I'm a guy that's 24. Each day I build some more. I like episode 7 and episode 8. I'm Rich Boy J. Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here back in with another video, and this is going to be another episode of the LEGO Star Wars MOC Showcase. This is a collection of some of the best MOCs that I've come across online, so if you can please support the builders if you like their MOCs, they certainly deserve it. All the links will be in the description of the video. Let's do this! The first MOC is titled Finn vs. Phasma, and it is by Sam JJ from Flickr, and this thing is just so cool. This is one of the few MOCs I've actually seen of this scene recreated, and this is definitely the only MOC I've seen of this scene done this way. So to start things off on the top level, you can see the MOC is basically just depicting the battle, and I love the stormtroopers that are kind of being surrounded by the battle. Like obviously they didn't have too much to do with the actual fight, but they're just kind of reacting to the Snoke's Star Destroyer hangar basically falling apart all around them. So I do like that the inclusion of those guys. It just really sets the scene of just chaos that was going on during this fight. The cargo crates over to the left look pretty nice. I like the use of the arches here. I think that was a really good idea to just make these, you know, unique looking cargo crates, especially with the studs and the tiles between them. That just looks really nice to me. One of the kind of subtle things about this MOC that I think really works that you might not notice if you were building a MOC like this is all the flame pieces are pointed in the same direction. You can see it's the plume piece, but they're all flowing in the same direction, which kind of gives the implication of like a specific direction of airflow, which is actually a really nice attention to detail. You would imagine, you know, if you were around a lot of fire, it would basically kind of trend towards whatever direction the wind or air is flowing. So the fact that these are all flowing in the same direction, I thought was just a cool little attention to detail. I like that he's using some of the tread pieces for debris on the floor. He actually uses quite a bit of those. They're laying around. And then there's just other one by one round plates with some flames sticking out of it. There's just a lot of chaos being depicted in this scene. And then finally, for this top level, I like the technique he used for the smoke, those dark bluish gray plates kind of stacked and once again flowing in the same direction that the fire is flowing. It just looks really realistic. The scene that's being depicted of Phasma and Finn fighting, it's where he like lunges at her, so I like that it's actually kind of accurate to the film. If we move down to the lower level of this MOC, I think this is where things get really interesting. I think that this middle column of just grieving looks really nice. It's not overdone in any type of way. It just looks really good. I especially love these wires over here, these cables that have basically snapped apart, but he's using those like trans blue, like almost like diamond or gem pieces kind of coming out of them to represent some sort of sparks. I think that just looks so freaking cool. Like that's a really awesome technique. And I like that he went such a long way to kind of like build the bottom area of the MOC. This isn't something we see extensively, like we see it when Phasma kind of falls through the floor, but I like this because he could have easily have just done the top level of this MOC and have been done with it, but including this bottom level allowed him to implement even more detail, and it also allowed him to implement this stormtrooper over to the left side who's basically hanging off the floor, and I think that looks pretty awesome. So overall, this is just an incredible MOC. Like this honestly is like worthy of the end of one of these videos where I like really go in depth on a MOC, but I wanted to start off right out the gate with this one because I thought this was a MOC that just needed to be seen by a lot of people. Excellent job, man. Next up, we have Ben Cossy's Clone Wars MOC from the Season 2 episode Bounty Hunters. And I think there's a lot to like about this MOC. First, the colors are just very nice. I love the sand green plates used as the grass on either side of the pathway. The dark tan pathway with the dark orange 1x1 tiles mixed in looks really nice. And I think the purple and pink flowers up top also are just a nice splash of color. We have Hondo and his group of pirates trying to ambush the Jedi over to the right side, who are with some bounty hunters, including Embo, who is using his hat to just totally obliterate one of the pirates, and I think that's hilarious. I love the fact that he uses his hat as a weapon, and I think it's just really cool here how he implemented that into the build. There are a lot of elements to this build that kind of remind you of the old countryside, including the brown fence that lines either side of the pathway, and this brown sign that goes over the pathway with a sticker that actually looks kind of cool. That actually looks like it makes a lot of sense right there. And over to the right side, there's the Star Wars-esque water tower that also looks pretty sweet. And also just love the force field that he implemented up to the top of the MOC using those lightsaber blades. And finally, he did a really good job building the speeders that the pirates are riding on. Next up, we have a LEGO Star Wars video game inspired build by Pablo Brickasso, and there are a lot of things about this build to really love. For one, the True Jedi meter up top is pretty ingenious. Like, I've done my fair share of LEGO Star Wars Easter eggs, but to throw in the True Jedi bar in an actual MOC, that's just freaking cool. So I really love that about this build. I also love the studs kind of scattered across the floor. This is very reminiscent of the last LEGO Star Wars 2 build I showed on Tatooine, where they used a similar technique. I actually think these builds are part of an overall collaboration, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't the same builder, but I do think these builds are actually related to each other in some way, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that that's the case. I also like this build a lot because it's not just done for the sheer novelty of, hey, check out my LEGO Star Wars 2 memes in my MOC, but it's actually a really well done MOC. I specifically like the pictures that are recreated with actual plates and bricks. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a picture, it's kind of just like the wall art on Bespin, but just the dishes, the 1x1 quarter tiles here, it just makes a really nice looking pattern. I remember looking at the somewhat recent Master Builder series Cloud City set, so this picture is kind of fresh on my mind, and this guy just did a great job at recreating it in LEGO with actual pieces, rather than just using the stickers that we got in that set. So I really do appreciate that. If we look over to the left, I think he has a pretty cool assortment of minifigs. I do appreciate the fact that he actually used the updated versions of these minifigs. Like, I get that it's supposed to be kind of a LEGO Star Wars 2 inspired build, but I like when people will still implement the newer figures, because it's like an homage, you know, back to the LEGO Star Wars 2 game, but you don't necessarily have to be hampered and, you know, reduce yourself to using the older versions of those figures. I also have no doubt that it was probably a lot easier for him to make the decision to do this, considering how expensive those original Cloud City figures are. The Chewbacca with C-3PO on his back is just awesome. I really wish LEGO would do some official version of that. I mean, his solution obviously works here with the string. I don't know if LEGO did it, if they would just like do a mold where it's like half of a C-3PO torso just molded right into Chewbacca's actual like head and torso mold, but I would like to see that represented in some way in LEGO. I also do appreciate the fact that behind Chewbacca and C-3PO, there's one of those access panels that you'd need like a protocol droid or an astro droid, or maybe even a stormtrooper to be able to get into that room. If we look over to the right side, we can see we have some really interesting wall panels that are achieved using some plates and bracket pieces placed on their sides, so I think that looks pretty cool. And I just love the fact that the citizens on Bespin are freaking out running around. That was one of the funnier parts of the level. The fact that there's just these random people freaking out and just running all over the place on Cloud City, so that was pretty nice. And I think the final thing I want to talk about is this middle section. I love this, once again, just random Bespin sculpture type thing that kind of sits in the middle of the room. I don't know, it might actually be a light, but I think he did a really good job at building it. The use of those candle pieces to represent like a nice thin tube that kind of connects the top cone part to the bottom base part, which is a really good parts usage. So overall, this is just an aesthetically pleasing MOC, even if you haven't played the LEGO Star Wars 2 video game. But if you have played the game, there's like another level of appreciation you can have for a build like this. So shout out to Pablo Brickasso, excellent job. The final MOC we're going to take a look at today is by Fuku Saku on Flickr, and this guy deserves so much credit for this build. It's not very often when someone can build Hoth and say that they 100% design every single element of the build, but he can say that. These are all his own custom vehicles, I believe, and they all, I think, offer something really special and unique to this build. The first thing I wanted to highlight is the AT-AT. I think it's a nice kind of mid-size AT-AT, slightly bigger than the LEGO set, not exactly minifig scale, but certainly fits into this MOC, and there's a lot of detail incorporated into it. I like the way he did the joints on this build. For one, they still bend, which is always nice on an AT-AT, but specifically the like knee joints and the hip joints, like it looks so good. I love it when people actually give some depth to like the ring and the little bar that goes across the joints on the AT-AT. Usually people will just slap a dish on it and call it a day, but I like when people actually care enough to really and try to incorporate as much detail into that as possible. And he even did it on the knee joints, which I think says a lot, because that's the one place that's like especially difficult to implement something like that. I think the body shaping looks really nice on this build. I'm just someone who has built their own AT-AT and spent a lot of time looking at, you know, actual AT-ATs. You can see he really just paid a lot of attention to the detail. Like a lot of the things I knew I had to implement on my much larger scaled AT-AT, this guy is done on the smaller scale AT-AT, so that's pretty sweet. If you look towards the top, I think he's actually using those neck bracket pieces kind of as greebling for the side of the walker, and that's really cool. Like that's a nice technique that I've actually never seen used in that way. The next photo gives us a look at the interior of the walker, and I love this part because you can see he's able to fit so many troops into this thing. Like the Lego AT-AT is, you know, similar to this size, maybe, you know, slightly smaller, but Lego doesn't put nearly as much effort into just loading these and just making sure you can load these things up with troops, and he did, and I give him a lot of credit for it. It looks great. There's 6 troops on the top level. You could add even more troops into the bottom level. And then on this next photo, you can see there's even troops in that front compartment. So there's just troops everywhere in the AT-AT, which is really what he'd want to do. I think that's just one of the cooler elements of these walkers. I also do appreciate the fact that he has the full crew in the front, the 2 pilots with the general right behind them. That's just a nice thing. The next thing I have to talk about is the snow technique, because this is what really made me realize, like, this is just a special MOC. Like, the way the hills of snow just so organically flow throughout this MOC is just simply breathtaking. Like, I don't know if he's the first person to ever use a technique like this, but I believe he's using basically the 2x2 tiles connected to one of those Lego net pieces, and what that basically allows you to do is have a more gradual change of slope in the hills of snow, and it just flows so well. Like, looking at this right now, I think this is exactly what I would want to do for Starkiller. It would have to be on a much larger scale, but I think this just looks so much better than when you try to use like wedge plates, or like just have the plates, or just have the tiles gradually step up, as opposed to having them all individual, like slope at just the slightest angle to really give a nice organic look to it. So this, like I said, like this, the snow alone on this build, I think is just breathtaking. You can also see his custom AT-ST walker over to the left side, which also looks really nice. I like that he used the superhero like energy blast pieces coming out of the cannons on the front of the walker, with some like cones and the like bar pieces in trans red to just represent the lasers that are being blasted from it. I think that's a nice way to just really give some oomph to the blast coming out of the AT-ST. Down below we have some Imperial snowtroopers running through the snow, and you can even see he has the footprints of the snowtrooper towards the back and the much bigger footprints of the AT-AT walker, and those look really good as well. The snow techniques he used on this thing are just next level in my opinion. It looks so good. And you also have a snowtrooper down below operating one of the E-Web cannons, and he's obviously just blasting at the rebels on the right side of the MOC. I do also have to give some recognition to his snowspeeder to the right side of the build, because I think this is definitely one of the best Lego snowspeeders that I've seen. Obviously, I prefer for it to be gray, but I'm not going to hold that against him. It's something that is really up to interpretation. Some people just really like the white snowspeeders. I personally prefer the gray, but it's still just a really nice looking build. One of the things I really appreciate about his snowspeeder that I don't often really ever see people try to incorporate is the fact that the entire cockpit is just sloped forward ever so slightly. I see a lot of people build snowspeeders, but they just have like the top of the cockpit just being flat and basically leveled with the rest of the vehicle. But if you look at a snowspeeder, the cockpit does slope forward. So I like that he actually incorporated that. It just makes it look so much more accurate in my opinion. The final thing I want to talk about on this build is his DF9 Hoth turret build. I love it when people actually try to implement the cone shape of this. Like, it's so simple and straightforward to just try to build it as a cylinder, and it doesn't look terrible that way, but it just looks so much more accurate this way. And this is something I would even like to see Lego do, because up until this point they just haven't. But this is a great looking DF9 build. This has to be one of the best ones I've seen. His cone shape looks so good and it flows very well. Like, this is not an easy thing to implement, which I think really shows why most people kind of avoid doing it, but he did it, and he did it so well. Like, this is just a great looking DF9 turret. With all of that being said, this is just one of the most comprehensive and impressive Hoth MOCs I've ever seen. You see a lot of people that really try to go for scale when it comes to Hoth, but this guy's just implemented so many cool and unique details and vehicles and building techniques that you really don't see on many other MOCs. So this is just one of the coolest Hoth MOCs I've ever seen. This really goes to show you, you know, you don't need a giant room to make an impressive Hoth MOC. All you need is just, you know, enough space to do what you want to do and enough creativity to do something that people have never done before. So kudos to Fuku Saku. This is just a breathtaking build in my opinion. Thank you so much for doing this and sharing it with the world, because it really just makes me happy looking at all the cool elements of this build.